Here we go. White Dwarf 117. September 1989. So I would have been 9 years old when I got this, and it absolutely blew my mind. I'd been really into fighting fantasy before that. That had been like my obsession. And I remember feeling like this thing that I'd stumbled across was kind of way darker and grittier than anything you got from those fighting fantasy choose your own adventure books. And what could be grittier, I suppose, than a sort of early Photoshop image of Tony Montana as a Dark Angel. Yeah, and this was the image because this is around about the time when they were racking up for, or sort of in the process of releasing, Space Marine. They'd done Adeptus Titanicus, and that had kind of within a year they were then releasing the Space Marine line to add that kind of infantry and vehicle thing to what would become Epic Space Marine. So yeah, and I remember being blown away by this image, but also, and I'm going to say this a lot throughout this whole review, wondering what on earth is going on here, because it's exciting, but not immediately clear if you don't know anything about Games Workshop. Something I thought about that I thought was really interesting about this is you have got a contents page here with 6 different game lines. So we're way before that period where you've got like the 3 main, like the 3 legs of the stool, which, later on would be Warhammer Fantasy Battle, 40K, and Space Marine. You've got all 3 of those on show, but you've also got Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, you've also got Space Hulk, and you've also got expansion rules for the Trolls game, which was a children's game that Games Workshop released this year, or a set of 4 children's games that were released that year, aimed at the market of sort of 7+. And what I find so exciting about 1989 as a year is they were clearly just trying anything and everything they could to see what stuck. You'll see that later on there's an advert for the Warhammer record label, and they were clearly just trying out absolutely everything.
Yes, I think they do mention Bolt Thrower and Wraith in this issue. Yeah. Here we go.
Where is it?
Warhammer Rock.
That's it. There you go. And you've also got the delayed release of The Lost and the Damned. They'd been doing sort of had they even started? I think no, maybe not. They trailed bits of what would go on to be the Lost and the Damned rules from that second Realm of Chaos book. But then it was a delayed project. And they kind of went on doing that for a bit longer. But yeah, so this is, I guess, as well, an exciting moment that you've got them announcing Flame Publications, which was when they turned all of the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay stuff into a subsidiary company that kind of produced its own stuff. Mike Bruton, Graham Davis, and Tony Ackland working separately on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And depending how you look at it, that was either a really exciting moment in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay where it kind of got to go off and become its own thing, or sort of the beginning of the end when they'd kind of separated the game off into this other little company that was releasing these books, but it was kind of being starved of oxygen at the same time. And as the battle games became more important, these heavy metals in this issue, I think, are the moment that I just went, oh my God, what on earth is this? And the kind of the obsession began, because it's such an eclectic range of models, but at the same time you can sort of see that there's a style and aesthetic tied together that ties it all together. So clearly McBeard's doing this because a good man with red, isn't he? On these ones. But it's just this kind of eclectic range of models, a life elemental, a night horror mummy, chaos champions, a Grey Knight Terminator. It's just this hodgepodge of different kind of aesthetics and designs, and it all looks amazing. Like that Dwarf Juggernaut conversion, I stared at for hours because it just looked like such an incredible thing. And I think one of the things I've like, if you're picking up White Dwarf for the first time and finding out about Citadel miniatures, I had no idea what a conversion meant. And like some of these models had so and so conversion written underneath them, and I was just like, what's a convert? Is that a thing in the game? Can it be a conversion? Or is that like, because clearly they were these really cool models, but I could not work out what on earth it meant. And I think that's the overwhelming experience of White Dwarf at this time, that they'd worked out that they were an advertising tool for Games Workshop, but they hadn't necessarily worked out how to onboard how to onboard people via White Dwarf. So if you go to that sort of, let's say like the mid 160s, by the time you've got the big boxes up and running, there's loads of White Dwarf articles which are like, here's how you collect a Skaven army. Here's how you get started with Space Marines. And stuff was kind of being like showcased and explained to you as if this was your first time encountering these models. But they didn't do that in this period. So you've just got, look at this stuff. A Space Marine conversion. Like, I don't know what I'm looking at. It's really cool. But what are any of these guys? Oh, and I've got a real sort of a real affection for the epic smoke trails that Richard Koenig does. I think I've got the bits all together to do a little epic scale diorama, and that's something which I intend to try and replicate. Is that those kind of rocket smoke trails or the jetpack smoke trails there? But once again, no clear idea when I was 9 what an epic scale model was and why they were photographing these guys from so far away. It was like it's just complete confusion, but delight at the same time. So here we go. We're into Codex Titanicus, which was the expansion book for Adeptus Titanicus, but it's, again, I think this is their kind of move fast and break things aesthetic, because they were releasing these expansions for Codex Titanicus. And I think this is a book that would go on to have the Eldar and Orc rules in them as well, at the same time that they were about to release the Space Marine rules to add like infantry and vehicles to the Adeptus Titanicus game, or to be its own kind of standalone game. But these rules for drop pods are coming out as an expansion to Adeptus Titanicus at the same time that they're releasing rules for infantry. So they are just clearly, it seems to me, churning these rules out as fast as they can in whatever form they can. In Talking Miniatures, that book that Robert Dews did recently, they talked about how lots of people talked about how the big thing that really got them obsessed with Games Workshop was when Adeptus Titanicus came out. Right. And for the first time, you had a war game in a box. Yes. So you had all of like 2 armies, 2 Titans each side, and you could open the box and start playing this game. Yep. Here's our boy Lehman Russ. I'm going to read this at some point on the podcast. It's
I'd love to hear it.
It's
good.
Yeah, well, no, but it's one of our It's almost like proto Horus Heresy, Protex. What's it called? What's that thing they do in the later issues where they have like, this is where each of the chapters of Space Marines comes from. It's completely gone from
starters or whatever it's called.
Yeah. Index, where they kind of they used to do those kind of like those lore things, and this is the first attempt you've got of doing a lore background that kind of. So I think the way you hear about an individual Primarch and what he's like. So I think this, once again, I remember being really, really struck by these images and by these images and by this kind of this setting. He's nowhere near as Viking-y as he will be later on. There's a lot of kind of like Viking language, but it's surface level stuff, I think, compared to what you get in the kind of, by the time that 2nd edition Space Wolves Codex comes out. They were producing these cards, so that this is what Space Marine 1st edition was based around. I think, like, actually weirdly way ahead of its time, isn't it? This idea of like, what if we produced data cards that had all of a model's stats on them, and they kind of and you could kind of refer to them. Like, you don't get that again until you get to sort of War Machine and Privateer Press, like decades and decades later. And I think they look great as well. I think these are these Tony Ackland drawings? I've got a feeling they might be.
They look like it. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're like, I think he was a really good man for sort of a very, very quick line sketch. And I think they look really, really great. So yeah, they're once again, no idea how they worked in practice, but certainly did a good job of evoking this world. And, you know, pink elves, yellow orcs, what could be better? Still advertising other people's games in White Dwarf at this point. It's a really interesting kind of end to this period where you still had people kind of running things that clearly they thought didn't directly compete with the Games Workshop brand. All of those adverts for Raven Armory that we saw earlier in Talking Miniatures, they explained that the reason they were running those is that Raven Armory made the Slayer swords for the Gold Demon competitions, and they did it for free in exchange for advertising.
Wow. Okay, for free.
Which makes sense now of why there was quite so many adverts for sort of jewelry and sword shops. There you are. This gives us a sense of where we were with Games Workshop's dealers at this moment. They got my store in there at that moment in time. They must have done.
Look at those drawings on the outside of the pages there. That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, those are all the all drawn from Warhammer armies, aren't they? They're all the illustrations from Warhammer armies.
Sure.
Of different kind of that's your Clan Rat, your Minotaur from the Chaos List, all of that type of stuff. I'm sorry, but I'm ill-equipped to talk about it. They were clearly pushing all of these. They just released the Eldar Legion and the Orc Horde, which were like that Grav tank and the infantry unit sprue and the Orc Boy and Battle Wagon sprue. It was amazing how quickly they came out with all of those sprues that we'd recognized from second edition Space Marine that I played quite a lot of. They all came out over a couple of months around about this period. They'd clearly got like the formula for doing a plastic sprue for Epic sorted out really quickly, and they released all of that stuff. All of those sprues that did service throughout that long second edition all came out for this game. That the Chaos Horde sprue was for these guys for this edition. That Imperial Guard one.
Well, this is something you'd be interested in, mate. I'm sure. Drachenfels.
Yeah.
So, Lewis, you actually read the story of Drachenfels on your podcast, but this is based on the story of the novel that is then converted into a role-playing scenario. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. So, well, it's not even a scenario. They clearly they were giving you these characters that you might want to meet in your adventure. And it's just like, here you are. These are these people that you could use if you wanted to. And they kind of give, if you look at the bottom, they give kind of suggestions about where you might run into these characters. And I don't know, like it was the obvious tie-in to do with that book. But I don't know if they kind of did and I guess they are interesting characters to use. But I don't. The problem of Drachenfels being effectively like a mystery novel, and then you get Drachenfels, and with all of his stats and his demonic magic level 4 and necromantic magic level 4, and it really reminds me. I don't know if you've read like the Call of Cthulhu role playing game, but they do a bit where they kind of like they give you, well, this is the stats for Cthulhu, and this is like the amount of damage Cthulhu can do per turn, and any PC that met Cthulhu would instantly be completely destroyed. But here's his stats if you want to encounter him. And Drachenfels is, I would argue, effectively a Cthulhu level creature.
Oh, the War Track. We've got some 40k content here.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is like clearly they'd got to a point. If you look at the history of vehicles in Rogue Trader, it became apparent very quickly that the vehicle rules didn't work terribly well. And I think that they do a rewrite of how the vehicle rules might work, sort of within a year of them coming out. And then this falls in that period between them coming out with the revised vehicle rules and then moving on to the data faxes, where you had the plastic sheet that you moved around for the targeting. Do you remember the ones you had? They've got like a side-on view. But we're still in the kind of like what you might almost call the 1.5 vehicle rules. But they, and I think because these things were White Dwarf articles first and additions to a rule set only second, I think they were never afraid of going, well, it can be pretty complicated, like a load of extra special rules. I felt that way about whenever you got Blood Bowl rules, that they were always going to go, well, what if you had magic items? What if there was a wizard? What if there was pit traps? And if you ever tried to put all of those rules into a single like game of Blood Bowl, it would become massively unwieldy. But yeah, they loved, as you can see on the page before, they absolutely loved a template that you cut out of the magazine and built this kind of special spray thing or whatever.
Yeah.
So good fun. But it had a snotling on the back. I really love that model.
Yeah, me too. I love it too. It's gorgeous.
About picking that one up.
Yeah.
It's
more heavy metal pages here with some beautiful looking green scouts. I don't know if they're Dark Angel scouts or not, but they look really nice in that color.
Yeah. I think you're still very much in the period where people were painting up Marines as they saw fit in that way. Like, I don't even know if the rules for Scouts had been developed at this point. I'm trying to think when you first got so obviously Scouts kind of become a really established part of the lore with Advanced Space Crusade, and I think that's like White Dwarf 131, something like that.
Yeah.
But I've got a feeling that there hadn't, although there'd been a Space Marine Scout model before, and clearly they'd made these guys, I've got a feeling that they hadn't actually worked out what their rule sets were and who they were. So goodness knows how they were meant to fit into the setting at these time. Right. And these are just cool green guys.
Yeah.
I listened to an interview with Rick Priestley on YouTube the other day, and he talked about how often you were just handed the model and told to make up rules. Like, we've made these models, make up rules for them. And a prime example of that is the Dwarf Mountaineer. Right. Where clearly somebody had an idea. We should do a dwarf on skis with a blunderbuss. He's really cool. And then in White Dwarf 1110, there's a whole set of rules for what if you want a unit of dwarf mountaineers. And they've got a whole thing about like they charge at double speed going downhill and stuff like that because they're on their skis.
Classic.
But yeah, it's great. And I've always had a real soft spot for this period's Inquisitors, that Order Malleus model.
Yeah.
In the Order, those guys in particular, just because they look simultaneously really janky, like that middle guy with his arms kind of raised up in the air. He is like the very, very worst of the kind of the 90s style, like the guys who are like, I've got two arms in the air, I'm pointing off into space. Yeah. And it's terrible, but at the same time, the weird sort of like conical Inquisitor hat and all of that type of stuff, he's somehow more than the sum of his parts. Yes. And there you go. Yeah, there you've got your classic Warlord Titans, and they'd released the other two types of Titans at this point. Obviously Adeptus Titanicus lives again, but those models for me are, just so evocative. I think the way that they fitted together and could be posed, like they look like what they are meant to be as much as anything in Warhammer looks like it is meant to be. Brilliant stuff.
Okay, we've got some like a Rhino variant here with the whirlwind.
Yeah, and this is the first of the Games Workshop idea that you might want to glue plasticard to the top of their Rhino kit. The Rhino kit was so expensive to produce that they made the Rhino so that it was made of two identical bits, one upside down and one kind of positioned back to front. So think about the fact that the Rhino's left is perfectly symmetrical. Right. So yeah, the top and a door is exactly the same as a bottom and the door on the other side, but flipped the other way around. because making that kit had been really, really expensive. So they could only make effectively half of the kit. So where they go then is going, well, why don't you make your own vehicles by sticking stuff to them? And you had a whole run of stuff like this. The Spartan tank for the Land Raider got a similar kind of treatment. The Vindicator, all of that type of stuff. And here they are. Trace these things and cut them out. You know, they're you know, and you can really see here, I think, that this was a period where they were imagining that this was being done by 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, not 12, 13, 14-year-olds, because the idea of having a go at making that thing was just absolutely terrifying. But you do see them in the wild now and again, ones that people had made at the time, and they look pretty good. So, you know, never know. Have a go. Once again, goodness knows how those rules actually panned out. They, you know, cut your whirlwind base and whirlwind templates out and spread them out across the board. I have no idea. I never got one into play because I was never able to make one.
Yeah, here we go. Here's your troll game.
Yeah. So these are quite good games. For, you know, I played them with my goddaughter when I owned them. Goodness knows what this expansion did, and this was it. This was the last time these things were ever made. My wife's aunt's husband worked for Games Workshop during this period, and I think he was the guy that wrote the Drachenfels rule set, the kind of the stats for Drachenfels and stuff like that back there. But he said that like the main thing that they were really proud of with the troll game is how cheaply they were able to put it together. Like the whole thing came off like they were really proud of like the fact that they printed the rules on the inside of the lid, and the bits of card that were kind of like offcuts from printing one thing could be used on another. So I think it was just like this experiment they did where can we make money off this? Can we sell something else in the shop that might also be another income stream? Is this something that we want to do? Later on, you get things like Crunch and Mighty Warriors and all of those, and the Space Fleet game and stuff like that, where people are like, we're going to create these games to onboard people from like 9 and 10 into being Games Workshop players at 12 and 13. But I don't think that was the idea with the Trolls game. I think it was like a thing for kids that we could also sell. I don't know whether they thought it would recruit you. You know, you start off with Trolls and you end with Realm of Chaos. That didn't seem to be the kind of the idea. And you got a cassette as well. You got a cassette of very annoying songs. Right.
Okay, that's funny.
So here we are on the spread for the Warhammer novels. You know, I've said this elsewhere before, but I've got a belief that basically Games Workshop players are like baby birds, and you just imprint on the first thing that you see. The thing that you see in your first White Dwarf that really grabs your attention, that's what you're obsessed with for the rest of your life. And I've ended up doing a podcast of readings of the novels that were released in the very first White Dwarf I ever saw. And I'm clearly like, they imprinted onto my brain. You know, you can this design, look at this kind of this imagery. It looked really grown up to me. And I know that Brian Ansell had chosen, he had, like, these things weren't being written by Games Workshop staffers. They hired people who were serious science fiction writers to write these books. And they had these Ian Miller inspired covers, which meant that nobody knew what these books were. I met Tony Ackland at Boyle when we went up there in the summer, and he said that basically they sent these out to like W.H. Smith's, and W.H. Smith's didn't put them in the sci-fi section. They put them in the sort of serious literature section because these covers were completely kind of like, what are they about? They don't look like, you know, a guy in a spaceship like flying out past a moon, or, you know, two guys having a sword fight. They look like these kind of abstract, I don't know, magical realist covers, and it really, really confused people. So they were kind of in a tough place in terms of marketability to begin with. But I absolutely love this aesthetic, that Ian Miller artwork. The you know, is really, really, really inspiring for me in a way I can't quite put my finger on. But yeah, absolutely brilliant stuff. Everyone a winner. And you know, a lot of that interior artwork as well was really, really exciting.
Yeah, mate, it's absolutely beautiful. And I love the covers. I think they're just absolutely amazing. So,
Yeah. Once again, what on earth is going on has been
yeah.
my mantra for today. So this is No Gold in Grey Mountains. I've read this, one of my early episodes on the podcast, written by Jack Yeovil, who is in fact Kim Newman, the author of Anno Dracula. It's like they clearly chose a story to include as an intro, and it's a really, really good one. I always feel like it's based on the Ealing comedy, The Lady Killers. Basically, a bunch of people kidnap a girl, a bunch of robbers kidnap a girl who turns out to be a vampire. I feel like that's not a hidden fact.
Yeah.
And then slowly, one by one, she offs them, or they off each other in the shadow of Castle Drachenfels. It's a really, really good introduction to the milieu that the novels were written in.
Yeah, well, Grace with some Gary Chalk artwork there as well.
Yeah, there's a load of artwork done for the novels that then kind of like disappeared, right? Yeah. So these guys like are absolutely burned into Old Hammer lore. I think like some of the most desirable models you ever got. And I remember looking at these for ages and just being like, wow, I want that regiment of pike dwarves. You know, people absolutely love them, don't they?
Yep.
Really brilliant stuff. And each of those Marauder dwarves is based on the Chaos ones are based on a Chaos warrior. They're like tiny versions of another bigger guy.
Yes,
somewhere.
I can see that now. The Oriental guy, especially. I know the Oriental guys.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
All right. Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
So they've all got a brother somewhere.
Yeah, that's nice. But this is an interesting painting guide here. I like those step-by-steps, and this is like the earlier ones they did, I think. Yeah?
It is like there's a lot of debate of like whether the painting guides were ever any use or not, whether you could. But I think the world of splashing ink all over things certainly kind of like was a revelation to me as a kid. It's like, oh yeah, that's how they get that depth. That's why there's that shading around it. But I feel if you look at this, I feel like an awful lot of work is done between highlights and final highlights and detail. Like it's like some magical fairy dust has happened between stage 5 and stage 6.
It's all lies. It's all lies. But that's what they did. But it certainly helped me when I was sort of learning to paint.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. And I had the guide from this era that told you what color paint to use as a highlight for what color base, and that all these initial steps. Really good. Absolutely blew my mind. And once you know a bit about Games Workshop models, you're like, oh well, this is a lot of very, very clever uses of the Lord of Change in a lot of different ways, and a load of pink horrors. But if you don't know what they're doing, if you don't know where these things have come from, they are absolutely crazy. That elephant haunted my dreams. It's such a cool. It's what's it called? It's an Umber Hulk is the thing underneath there with an elephant head and then the giant scorpion arm. Yeah. But at the time, I was like, what on earth is all this stuff? And then your boy Fraser Gray. This is not to be like, well, Games Workshop used to be like this, but you really did in this period get to see people that had their own unique take, their own unique palettes with which they painted these models. And once again, you're just staring and feeling like there's this whole world of models of ways to do this game, that you could approach it, different ways that you could paint stuff. Once again, what on earth is a conversion? What makes that pink horror a conversion? At the time, it was just a complete mystery to me, because what's a pink horror, I suppose. But yeah, I absolutely love those demon princes. And Pete Taylor, like a lot of that, I think those bodies of the Demon of Khorne are all hand sculpted. I think they are, that's pure. There's a lot of, like, he was great at spotting a model, but then also great with a millipup when time came. So I think still some of my very, very favorite Citadel miniatures I've ever seen. I think that's probably an objective read rather than than just pure nostalgia.
Yeah, amazing to be honest, stuff. I didn't really take to Pete Taylor's conversions personally, but I can see, what he's a very experienced and very, professional.
And I think it
It
catches what the realm of chaos, that D1000 mutation chart was meant to feel like. And I think that's, I really loved that, and it felt like, well, this is the pinnacle of that craft. That's a pink elephant, man. Come on.
Yeah, well, yeah, you can't beat that. Yeah, here we go. Here, the stats, the chaos spawn.
Yeah. And like, what's great is a load of them are absolutely rubbish. Like the realm of chaos mutation rules did not necessarily generate very powerful monsters. So that horse thing with the 2 arms is movement 1, weapon skill 3, strength 3, toughness 3, wounds 1. Like, he had 3 attacks, but he had not necessarily like come out of it as a kind of a thing that you'd necessarily want to slam onto the tabletop. Yeah. And even the demons were not necessarily like super powerful if you generated them from the baseline up. Fun times.
Yeah. I'm still looking forward to rolling my first chaos champion or spawn or whatever in those books. I think it's a really fun idea.
Yeah. So these always seemed like having those gift vouchers in the front of a white dwarf and realizing that you lived hundreds of miles away from a store where you might possibly be able to use them always felt really sad. So we now get into the period of expansion rules for Space Hulk. So obviously Space Hulk had been a big success, had come out with White Dwarf 113, and they were now releasing things to sort of expand that. So you got your close combat Terminators and stuff like that. And there's my store. There's Truro Micro. That's the store that I used to go to as a kid. Amazing.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah, they got bought out by Games Workshop, but they were great. They were really incredible, like a really great store. And the guy who owned it was a really good painter as well. Nice. And for some reason, they owned that 2D diorama from the back of White Dwarf 109 that was like a siege, like a vertical siege with with like people breaking into a castle and orcs and dwarves and humans fighting. And that once again absolutely blew my mind. So this, in my opinion, fixed Space Hulk.
Right.
And I think it was an absolutely brilliant idea for Space Hulk, because the criticism of Space Hulk is that it's like cricket, and when you're the Terminators, you are batting, and then when you're the Gene Stealers, it's fielding. You're kind of waiting for your turn to be the batsman again. And the idea is like the Gene Stealer has got such an infinite supply of guys, can be sort of so careless in the way that he plays, that the Terminator experience is much, much more intense than the Gene Stealer experience.
Yeah.
What this army list system proposed is that you would bid points that you thought that you could complete a mission in, and whoever bid the lowest points then got to be the Terminator. And if you bid 15, you then had to do the mission, but you only had 15 points of troops. So it was kind of like you began with a game of chicken. And then if you could do it, you won. But if you couldn't do it, obviously you lost. But it was trying to work out what was the minimum number of troops that you could complete the mission with. So here we go with the first. It's not the first battle report in White Dwarf, because there'd been 24 hours at Carrick Mound in White Dwarf 107, which was a report of like a 24-hour charity game. But this is the first report from the Osprey World Championships that were held at Games Day, where people were playing like competitive Warhammer Fantasy Battle against each other. I am fascinated about this because this is the Warhammer competitive scene before the internet. So there's not loads of people kind of talking over lists and kind of metagaming and things like that. People must have rocked up and just played whatever they were playing, or had worked out whatever they were playing, without really communicating with the other competitive players beforehand. Two things to point out is clearly they kind of make inference to the fact that the year before they discovered that the rules for flying monsters were incredibly overpowered, and people had played armies almost entirely composed of dragons being ridden by high elf lords. and it had ruined the day so much that really powerful flying monsters had been banned the next year. So this is the first kind of earliest examples of comp and people kind of trying to manage like broken bits of the rule set. The other thing that's amazing is that the article makes it clear that people wouldn't tell White Dwarf what were in their army lists, because they want, I think there was still a lot of kind of like secret information in addition, and people were unwilling to tell people what models they had in their army list in case people stole their ideas. That idea of kind of like that we have now, where people will post tournament winning lists and there'll be a kind of sense of the meta, just hadn't bedded in. So yeah, and then they say summer release, but it was then out the next, I think maybe they meant it had just come out. Right. I'm not sure, because this is September, but it was out and available by the next edition. There you go, Orc Horde and Eldar Legion. Those were those first sets. I bought my mate the Orc Horde because he liked 40k orcs, thinking it was a box full of 40k orcs, and then he opened it and it was full of these 6mm guys. Slightly disappointed, but they were cool. Like that little battle wagon with a skull on the front was a winner, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. You sold them to a good game there, mate. That's for sure. Grey Knights.
Yeah, and they're clearly like, we've got this model. What can we make in this style? Terminators are selling. Yeah, there's a short story about Grey Knights in one of the White Dwarves as well. Like they were insanely powerful. They were, as they were in later editions as well. Like 5 Terminators with like level 4 psychic powers or whatever. They were absolutely loopy. But yeah, all of this stuff was great, wasn't it? Like, and they'd clearly hit upon that thing of going, wait, we can make like roughly the same guy and then put different arms on him and package him again. That was really cool.
It's a winning formula, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. Especially the Inquisitors.
Yeah.
They're it's like a psi weapon, digital weapons.
Yeah. And again, these are models that like you couldn't actually put an Ordo Malleus Terminator in guy in Terminator armor. Like they were making models that technically didn't have rules in the game. You could piece it together. Terminator armor cost 50 points, but it was it was still kind of like the models were outstripping the rules in terms of like the rate that they were being produced.
It was a nice dwarf war machine.
These boys, that flame cannon, man, like ever, like the storytelling in that set, has that ever been beaten? I mean, obviously probably it has, but I just remember being like, what a fun concept, what a brilliant bit of storytelling there. I think I like one of the things I really love about this era models is because everything is single piece. You get a sculptor's vision of what that thing needs to look at, and the story is in the hand of the sculptor. I just think that's those bundled up guys are a real picture of that. And the flame cannon rule was really, really dangerous as well and did explode, so accurate as well. Model reflects rules. Yeah, that big orc boss, big boss, he's remained a hero for ages. Like people love that still. There's Lehman Russ as well. Technically Space Wolf Marine Commander. We told you what you could actually do with him on the battlefield rather than playing him as a Primarch. And there's Rat Spike, the art book by Blanche and Ian Miller. Ian Miller probably not long for Games Workshop at this point. Ian Miller had some sort of big falling out with with Games Workshop, and kind of, which is why he does those Realm of Chaos books and then is is kind of gone from the scene in a lot of ways. But yeah, like it's still really interesting that they thought that also might be a thing that they wanted to do. We're also going to produce collected editions of Warhammer art book, of Warhammer art, or the art of Warhammer artists. In fact, sometimes not specifically Warhammer related. It's a thing I'd really, really like to own, but I think it was, they were trying stuff out, seeing what sold. Yeah. And again, this is a prime example. One of the thing they stopped doing not long after this, which is taking photos of models by burying them under sand.
Yeah.
Imagine being like, and you had to then get the sand off the models, and imagine trying to bury an epic base of like 5 guys in just enough sand so that it didn't bury the guy. Yeah. But still looked like they didn't have a base, and they gave up on that after a while. realizing that people probably wanted to see what the game itself actually looked like. But you get these beautiful images. Absolutely. And again, I just remember being like, because, you know, I've bought this issue, I've got no idea what the Horus Heresy is. I've got no point in the issue around which Space Marine is being released. Has anybody bothered to explain in White Dwarf what the story is behind the game Space Marine? In fact, I don't think it really got a kind of a big explanatory release thing that you get with an edition of Fantasy Battle or whatever in later editions. So you just look at this and go like, what is going on with all of those little guys and the red army fighting the blue army? But it looks cool as hell.
Well, Lewis,
what a time.
Absolute joy, mate, to go through this issue with you for your very first issue 117. And I've learned a lot from just listening to you, mate, about a lot of things in the issue, as I do with every guest that comes on to talk about their first White Dwarf. And I hope you enjoyed going through it again, mate.
It's been a pleasure. Loved it. Amazing stuff. Happy memories.
Well, just before we go, please plug your podcast to who may not know about it.
So my podcast is the Oldhammer Fiction Podcast. It's readings and analysis of the Warhammer novels that were released between 1989 and 1995. It's a big back catalogue now of stuff that you can go and listen to. So I've done all of the anthologies in the first year, Ignorant Armies, Wolf Riders, Red Thirst, and Deathwing. And I'm now moving on to the novels. So all of Drachenfels is there if you'd like to listen to it. And I've also done what seems to be really popular is readings of the short fiction from Realm of Chaos and also from a load of White Dwarves as well. And I'm sort of reading them and then analyzing them, trying to place them in the historical context, often of like the shadow of the nuclear bomb in the late 1980s. So if that sounds like your type of thing, do give it a listen.
So people should go and check that out immediately, I think, and get onto it, mate. So thank you very much again, Lewis. Enjoy the rest of your day, mate, and we'll catch up again very soon to talk about something else, I'm sure.
Speak to you soon.
Okay, mate. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.